Welcome everyone, and many thanks for all your questions ahead of time, and a big warm welcome to you, Ken. It's great to have you here. So just before we get started, I just wanted to give everyone a bit of background to Ken. Ken is a 20 plus years veteran in technology product management. Ken has pioneered and teaches the first product management course offered in the engineering school at University of California, Berkeley, which has over 400 PM alumni practicing in the industry. Throughout his career, Ken consistently defined, launched, and managed award-winning innovative web and mobile products loved by customers and used by millions of users across 60 plus countries. Previously, Ken served as Vice President of Product Management at leading online education companies, Masterclass and Lynda.com, which is LinkedIn Learning, and is currently an executive consultant and advisor for startup and scale-up companies in the US, Europe, Asia, and Australia. He's recently released the influential Product Manager, How to Lead and Launch Successful Technology Products, which is a highly practical and approachable guide to becoming more effective and navigating the challenging collaborative aspects of the product manager's role. And a copy of Ken's book is available for all of you and have been delivered to HQ. So next time you manage to get to the office, it'll be there waiting for you. So welcome, Ken.
Thank you.
And sort of get into the questions. There were a number of themes that we'll get through.
Yeah.
I was going to say I might have to change my question to what do you think the future of education is worldwide? Just with that background, because I'm very interested in that. But yeah,
sure, I can definitely, if we have time at the end, I'll definitely give you that. It might otherwise be the full hour. So.
So I think one of the big themes that came up from a number of the questions asked by the group was, what does it mean to be a product-led company? And particularly in the context of Hireup, which delivers a people-driven support service, but is enabled through a digital experience. So be really interested in your thoughts, Ken, on what you see as a product-led company.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that. And just also, just because we're a small group and we have a lot of really great questions here that you've submitted. I would love this to be as conversational as possible. So don't hesitate to interrupt or ask or probe on things. I'll try to keep my initial answer a little high level to put sort of a framing out there. I might go down into some specifics or examples to illustrate that. But the goal is to give you a little bit of a framing, and then thinking, unlike you, I don't have a lot of the context of your specific organization. So it might be interesting if you wanted to probe on a specific area that you've either tried or give me a little bit of an example that you want to drill in on. We can do that. I just set expectations. We're not going to get through everyone's questions, but we'll definitely get through like a couple of really meaty, like 3 or 4, 5 maybe. So that's the goal, is to really make sure that you get the value out of this conversation by drilling in on the things that are most important at a really good depth. Otherwise, they're too high level, or we end up spending our time just on one topic. So, Matt, feel free also to cut me off when you say, "Great, we're going to move on." I'm really accustomed to that. And then, the digital, the digital umbrella, sort of pulling off the stage. So feel free to do that. Let me start just to talk a little bit about product-led. And I think I'll start with 2 definitions that would be helpful to level set what product means. And then I'll give you an anti-definition, if you will. Let me define product-led first. A product-led organization is an organization where the product that you're selling is at the center of the company. It's the focal point for the whole company. It's the main vehicle, and this is probably the most important part of this, it's the main vehicle for optimizing the end-to-end customer go-to-market funnel. And I'll define what a funnel looks like in a minute, but I'm sure you're all aware of it. So a product-led company actually is all about the organization being oriented around the product at the middle. A product-led company is not where the organization kind of exclusively owns all of the components of the product, or is exclusively in charge of making decisions or unilaterally kind of deciding on how the company is going to succeed. Neither are they a service organization. So they are pretty central to that to that whole picture. They're one of the most central parts of the organization to a product-led company. But it's not product, the organization led, it's product, the product led. Product-led approaches really create a company-wide alignment across teams, including marketing, sales, customer success, engineering, and design, where all those activities that those organizations are performing are linked back to accelerating and removing friction points within that customer funnel. So that's essentially what a product-led company looks like. Another definition to be clear on is, let me define further what a product is. And a product is not just the technology. It's not just the digital enablement. Neither is it just the service component. So it's not, say, Amazon might define their website as the delivery mechanism and the product, so that the actual things that get delivered. You might, as a marketplace, see your actual products as the services you're delivering, and the digital experience is merely the vehicle to get there. The product is actually the entire customer experience, every single touch point, whether it's enabled by technology or a human touch point or some kind of hybrid. And so really great product-led companies understand the full customer journey through every stage of that funnel, through every touch point, and understand how technology and human components interact with each other. So it could be online, web, it can be more offline, kind of email, text message, and all of those sorts of digital methods. And then it can be the actual customer's experience when they actually interact with a human. Whether that human is a member of your company or one of your service providers, it's still part of your product. And that's a pretty profound thing to actually think about, because you're effectively saying that you have to take responsibility for every interaction that even your service providers would provide to your customers, and make sure that those are effectively as high quality and low friction as possible. So that's my opening kind of gambit about product-led. Pause there for any questions, and then I noticed there were some questions about what actually makes a successful company, and I'd also like to define a little bit more about the funnel I was talking about.
Yeah. Are there any follow-up questions to that? I know there are a number.
Does that resonate with people?
I'm fairly new into the whole concept of.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
Go ahead, Lynn.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that was a great definition. I just wanted to clarify, when people say customer-led organizations versus product-led organizations, is there a difference in your opinion, or are they actually synonymous in the same thing?
Yeah, no, that's really great question. I think good product-led customers are customer-led. And actually one of the most central success criteria, if you will, is that you can see, when you know you're a product-led company, is you have a true culture of customer. That includes that you've got personas, your values align with the customers, subtle things around like pricing align with the customer's value. You have the perspective of that customer journey over many touch points, and kind of everyone in your organization can point to where they fit into that overall customer journey. Frankly, you see the customer as an ongoing relationship. Now, on the surface, you can say, yes, we do that, but actually it comes into the behaviors and the everyday interactions and DNA. And I haven't observed those to say whether you're a product-led company or not yet, but it's like you really can see it when you see the culture of a company operating in that way. Now, there is such a thing as bad customer-led. And bad customer-led is when an organization, or particularly a product organization, is really effectively taking orders from their customers. This happens probably more for enterprise customers, but happens quite often with consumer companies too, where it takes flavors of like, you need to land a big deal. And to land that big deal, you need this laundry list of features to be checked off. Otherwise, you're not going to get that deal. Good product-led companies will say no to those deals. They'll seriously say no to the deals. I've been at the table when those deals have been said no to. So you can have that discipline. Bad customer-led might be over-responsive to seeing patterns within the data and immediately trying to address what they think are the root cause issues, but often maybe they're trying to solve problems for the wrong customer, or maybe they're leaping to conclusions. Quite commonly, bad customer-led companies will be prescribed a solution from like a stakeholder or a customer, and will tend to immediately gravitate to trying to implement a solution without actually taking steps back to identify and really understand the problem first. And then secondly, to really prioritize that within all of the different things that they can do. So that's bad customer-led. Bad product-led, by the way, is everything I just talked about. Bad product-led is thinking everything is about the technology and overlooking the full customer experience. So that's my difference. So yeah, it can be the one and the same, but it really comes down to some of the behaviors and the way that customers impact what you do. Essentially, great customer-led companies don't actually listen to their customers for solutions. They listen to them for problems.
That's really cool. I love everything you're saying, Ken, in terms of like really thinking about that whole journey and the touch point strategy, and that we're all kind of part of product. That's a very interesting kind of philosophy to think about.
You're part of product.
Yeah, for sure. Any tips or tricks, like just in your experience, around how companies have successfully organized around these different like parts of the journey, or parts of that funnel?
Yeah.
And now considering that we're all part of product, if that was a product-led approach. Yeah.
Well, you know, product. This is tricky because you can't have you can't be all part of product, right? As in terms of the team, but you can all be part of that customer journey. So the first thing that does really work is, first of all, breaking down that customer funnel and being very explicit about the activities that each department, if you will, contribute towards that. And so if I was break down that funnel for you right now, I'll just keep it at 5 levels. A good success criteria is, has a company actually done this? And that is to break down the funnel and then be very articulate about the different activities that feed into that, and then actually to put KPIs against that. So the first level of the funnel consideration. In a product-led company, the product's value proposition is just super clear to everyone involved who see the front door of the product. There's almost kind of no human selling required. That's why really complex enterprise companies tend to struggle with becoming product-led, because they're complex products that need a lot of enterprise selling. But it is why there's been this huge shift of consumerizing particularly simpler enterprise products, or enterprise products that have a clear value to the user, but not necessarily to the economic buyer initially. And so you're finding that the product value is very, very clear and obvious to a specific target audience at the consideration phase. So you can see that, you can read their website, you can kind of like, you get into it. The second thing is that there's an acquisition stage. And typically, there's an extremely low cost to entry. The product promise is made, but really the thing that really backs it up is the fact that you can experience the promise in real life, and the product has now kind of demonstrated itself to really do the trick. Whether this be a trial basis, in your case, there might be some other aspects to it that you need to think through, but the acquisition stage actually doesn't actually happen until after someone has successfully tried your product. And that's flipping some models on its head, right? Because now you're literally either pushing a point of purchase up, or you've got some other model of trial. Activation is typically what will happen is there's much more of a self-service kind of flavor to it. It feels like the customer can solve their own problems when they're onboarding, when they're getting to that first point of value. And it feels quite frictionless, and really great product-led companies spend a lot of time actually thinking about the first experience, because that's an aha moment. I have one of my mentors, when I was obsessing about my retention numbers, said, you don't have a retention problem, you have a first 5 minutes problem. And that's when everything kind of like that, those first couple of stages is kind of when everything kind of like is the aha and the loyalty is actually created. Then you worry about engagement, which is retention, and advocacy, which is loyalty. And interestingly, at that point, obviously the metrics of repeat usage and customers coming back is pretty important. And that's where many parts of the organization will be involved with continuing to bring customers back. That's one really great kind of area of mutual responsibility. But something that's often overlooked is what are we doing to drive virality, which is where your retained loyal users actually start feeding your top of the funnel. And so increasingly funnels are actually now being turned into flywheels. It's the new meme coming from Silicon Valley. Flywheels.
Yeah, I've read a lot of those lately.
So, and that's what they mean, is
Yep.
to actually start thinking about every layer of the function, every layer of the funnel, not as its own distinct kind of step, but actually every layer is an opportunity to drive growth, either by making it quicker to go down the layers, or by leveraging people at those layers, users of those, to attract new users. So there's this sort of this mindset. Okay, so to get back to your
bigger
question,
and heavier and rotates faster and faster.
that's the notion, right? Flywheels, well, funnels, flywheels, I don't care. The bottom of the line, you can use the framework you want, but then the devil's in the detail. So let me pick apart one example there. So when you think about the activation stage, product plays a massively important role in thinking about how do I help people onboard as quickly and seamlessly as possible to get to that first point of value. And if you think about people who get trapped in that stage, who don't move down the funnel, customer success, their role suddenly changes to not one of responding to incoming issues, but their job suddenly becomes one of constantly looking to nudge people down those layers. So they will have two new responsibilities. One will be, how do I actually nudge people to activate who haven't activated? And how do I reach out to monitor, do I monitor adoption and utilization, and how can I actually help drive better outcomes there? So even customer success groups, which in all honesty have often been seen to be like a cost center, suddenly become incredibly valuable levers to driving growth for the organization. Another example is marketing. So rather than seeing marketing as kind of this sort of function that has all these components to it, really great product-led companies understand that marketing needs to be, and I might be going out on a limb here, and I don't mean to offend anyone, but their primary roles, at least from a company growth perspective, I understand there's investor marketing and brand marketing and all those, and a ton of really valuable activities, but being very clear on targeted acquisition with as low customer acquisition cost as possible to create the widest possible funnel. That's their job. And how can we, because a product-led company needs a very, very wide funnel, because unlike maybe a more traditional organization where it's targeted leads, long sales cycles, but there's lots and lots of touch points, you're really wanting a sea of potential warm leads that you can constantly be trying to push into that activation phase. And that's the job.
Yeah, I really like that point on kind of trial. Something that obviously we're thinking about is trial, and how putting that in that acquisition phase really makes sure you have those really well qualified leads, registrations, signups, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
in terms of kind of getting that person to activation quite a bit quicker because they already understand the value prop and how your product works and everything
Exactly.
else. That's a pretty interesting concept.
The two metrics that I found are becoming more important for marketing organizations and for marketing departments and product-led organizations, low CAC and total number of what they call product qualified leads or PQL. And if you can get those numbers up, that's the role of at least acquisition marketing. And interestingly, you notice I'm not talking about conversion rates. It's because the product sells itself eventually. And so it's more about creating that broad top of funnel of warm product qualified leads as being that primary job. Now that
interesting.
Want to structure it. But.
So kind of you're trying to get those people into the product to trial and have that experience because the product's going to do the rest in terms of the experience and engagement.
Theoretically, but
potentially,
that's where the next people down in the funnel have to really step up. So here's a great example. Design, their job is to offer the best possible user experience with the least human assistance as possible. How do I smooth out as much of the friction as possible so as many people are getting into that stage, having that meaningful first interaction, which actually should be a North Star for product-led companies, as possible. So now, rather than thinking about design and experience, like they're thinking about like, how do I measure getting people as quickly as possible to that next phase with the least sort of human interaction as possible. Now, that's not to say that human interaction is not important. In fact, it's part of your service delivery. I'm talking about top of funnel, like trying to handhold people through those stages. Here's another example, enterprise sales, probably not apparent to you, but in enterprise sales, this is one of the biggest tensions of product-led companies is shifting from what are more sales-led companies into product-led companies. I'm actually currently going through that with one and it's not pretty. But for enterprise sales, the shift goes from being a source of customer needs and basically prescribing those to the rest of the organization of what needs to get built, and incoming kind of like sales opportunities, to one of identifying and harvesting accounts out of those product qualified leads by aggregating people across organizations together, or typically enterprise organizations together. Might be a little different for you. Maybe you don't have enterprise sales, it's fine. But just when you think about enterprise companies becoming product-led, you get that shift where enterprise sales actually coming later in the funnel, actually almost mid-funnel, where they're harvesting people across the organization, aggregating them together because they're seeing teams. Asana is a great example of this, and Twilio was a great example of this. You saw teams across organizations starting to adopt the technology, and now the economic buyer is then engaged. What is traditionally the economic buyer saying, they're already using your product, they're already getting value. How do we actually make this more sticky and better value for you by aggregating those together, creating enterprise level deals? And that's a very big shift for enterprise sales companies to effectively be almost kind of after product has really built a very large user base.
Good. So maybe it's a follow-on question to that, Ken. You talk about product working with, every department being aligned to the customer journey and the touch points and being able to contribute to the success of that. There were some questions that came through around this about how does product and the rest of the organization sort of work together effectively to achieve this, and get alignment on that rather than just the product organization over off to one side maybe, and making sure all of the teams are aligned to the same goal.
Yeah. So let me definitely talk about that. I'll talk about structurally first, okay, and then we can talk about some tactically how to actually get started around it. And if it doesn't do the trick, just please interrupt me and drill on it. I will talk and assume that you're getting value out of it unless I get interrupted. So please don't feel like hesitant and like, no, that doesn't make any sense to us. You know, please don't worry about it. So it actually starts with understanding that funnel or flywheel and getting at the core metrics that you want to measure at each stage. And those metrics are actually not maybe ones you're even traditionally used to, because I'm not talking about revenue, number of customers. I'm actually talking about the kinds of metrics that are leading indicators that demonstrate that whatever stage the customer is at, that they're successfully moving into that step and getting some value out of the product. Or if it's not value yet, that they're on that journey. So typically these are, you know, percentages moving from one to the other. There are actions that they might take that are very, very clear. It may be that they've completed a trial, for example, or it may be that they've actively recommended someone into the product. It may be that they've clicked on something and accepted something and there's a demonstrated step that they've taken. I'm working with one enterprise company. It's a platform company that is all about APIs. They don't even have a user interface. How do they measure it? Well, it turns out that they can measure a certain volume of activity on their APIs per customer. And if there's some threshold, which they don't quite know what that threshold is, but if there's a threshold that's passed, they know that the customers move from doodling and sort of messing around with the technology, which is kind of, they're still in that kind of early consideration stage, into truly being activated. So you can get to those behavioral based kind of value indicators at each stage. And then once you have that, you do need to then break out kind of the different roles and responsibilities. And so it can be something as simple as a little racy or something that just says, here's the different activities that each department needs to actually contribute towards driving that. There might even be a sub-metric to that. So for example, Masterclass, we were mutually responsible for engagement or rather reactivation of unengaged users. That was kind of one of our key metrics at that engagement level, because we noticed that we had some really good retained users. We could just focus on them, but there was also a large group of unactivated users. So it wasn't just product's responsibility to figure that out. It was actually also our customer relationship marketing, or our email marketing more precisely, its responsibility. And so we defined those. We would provide technologies to enable certain things. There were certain more like delivery-based metrics for us, product. And it was more on the email marketing person. And we identified a various set of metrics around reactivations. And then she had, because it was a department of two, the leader, she had a whole bunch of more traditional metrics that she was looking at, but the core goal was reactivation. And so just trying to be really clear about those different responsibilities across each level is the first step. The more subtle things are around, and I saw some questions around shifting product from being more on the service orientation kind of model to more front and center. You can define these responsibilities, but then it actually has to kind of take in the organization. So sort of tactically, you have to recognize it's going to take some time and trust to shift all of these behaviors. And that's where agreeing on some values become very important, and then starting to shift that. So let me take the point, the case in point of actually shifting product from being more of that project managey service kind of organization into one where it's a little bit more product led at the core. and other organizations are also supporting that product-led vision. So they're not equal, they're equal, they're not above or below. The first thing is to really elevate all of these different conversations that come at them to one of outcomes over output. So we can start with, like, rather than prescribing a solution, let's talk about the problems you're trying to solve. Let's actually, so that's kind of that 5 whys technique used a lot. Secondly, it might be actually starting to sign up for outcome-driven OKRs. If you look at your OKRs, if you use OKRs, read them. If they sound like I'm delivering a bunch of stuff, you've got the wrong OKRs. If they're more about I'm delivering these outcomes for the business, that you can look back at the funnel and say, if we deliver that outcome, that's starting to remove friction in this funnel or flywheel. I can see how it maps back. And by the way, that goes for every part of the organization. That's the first step. And then product and engineering and design kind of need to be organized maybe differently. Organized around customers and needs, ideally end to end with kind of full stack teams that they can kind of like say, I'm looking at or customer needs or the funnel. Like I look at the onboarding part of the funnel, or maybe you have, because you're a two-sided marketplace, you have a distinct group looking at one customer over the other. Being very clear about that organization and making sure that each team truly is empowered and has all of the resources that they can kind of operate independently to optimize for their part of the metrics, that then of course still map back to that overarching framework that I was talking about before. Having a clear prioritization model is a great way of saying, this is how we decide things are done. And they're goal driven or theme based or scored. So when you come to me with things, this is our process. Here's our criteria. When people start seeing how things are actually decided in terms of priorities, they start understanding how to engage things differently with it. And then of course, in return, that requires transparency. So every department needs to be very open about where they stand and what they're doing. There's I'll mention another important value that needs to go along with that. Accountability is important. So they're delivering on outcomes, or, and this is the caveat, you need to value learning in all of its own right. Failure is okay if we learn from it. And so the transparency is good if it's not about trying to, just hold people unreasonably accountable to something they committed to, and just sort of, I've definitely had experiences where managers have tended to really beat up on people who didn't hit their outcomes. Now, obviously that happens consistently over a year. That's a different story, but being able to point to either outcomes that you drive or learnings that have helped you make better decisions in the future, that's massively valuable if you can kind of get everybody there. And then if all else, even if that works, the other thing to really start focusing on, and this is important, particularly if these are very big kind of like changes you're making, is just start shipping in smaller increments. Because I see if you just start pushing something out, it can be one aspect of this bigger picture. You start getting into that cycle, and you learn something and you test it and you validate it, and it may work, may not work. You're not very good at it to start with, but you just start having kind of like opportunities that's kind of at bat, and eventually you start actually really doing well, because you're now on a repeated learning cycle, as opposed to you will fail. I'd be categoric in that. If you do everything I just talked about, transparency, accountability, and having all of the clear prioritization stuff, if you then don't have frequent enough opportunities to kind of retrospect how you're doing. And so if you're on that, which I've seen in some places, probably not yours, but I've seen 6 months or 12-month kind of delivery windows, or even 3-month delivery windows. That's not enough frequency to kind of be able to get better at things.
you expand, Ken, on the prioritization model a little bit on how you would consider dimensions like quality and risk in that prioritization model?
Yeah, absolutely. Goal-driven prioritization models sort of break into a couple of different categories, and they can be heavier ones. This tends to be important for certain companies with certain cultures. They can be very lightweight, but more frequently revisited. So I won't try to get too detailed in the different methodologies, but if you have a clear perspective of the KPIs you're trying to drive, then you can organize around those in a number of different ways. One methodology is to actually just take that customer funnel I was talking about, and if you can put a team against each of those, you have your structure right there. And then right there is everything that comes into this team is trying to optimize for that particular metric. And they prioritize everything based on that particular kind of set of metric and offer a set of secondary indicators. Another way of doing it is more theme-based, where you might have customer delight. You might have getting rid of irritants and bugs. You might have moving some kind of key metric, and those might change quarterly, but you decide on some key themes that you really want to advance. And then you might have, again, either teams oriented around those, or if you don't have teams oriented around those, you need some way of being able to kind of score and rank them. So you might use more of a scoring methodology to decide on which ones you want to move forward. I prefer the hard wiring of teams and organization around specific KPIs. The more outcomes driven you can get with everything else aligning around it, the better. That's sometimes impractical because of technical, different, maybe the platform is very hard to work on and you need areas of specialty. Sometimes the product management team is not as skilled enough to be able to figure out how to feed things through to different parts of the organization. But the more you can align around a particular goal and have a very clear accountability of a team across the board. I'm not just talking about a PM, I'm talking about engineering, design, and then even going a bit further, if you can assign people within the organization outside, because they're product led, who's the natural person in marketing or person in customer success to really be lending a hand to any of the technology development. That'd be a great way of doing it. But I can go in a little more detail if you want, Florian, but I
think that's very good. Maybe just a point in terms of how do you then arbitrate between the different tensions across teams, almost like from a trade-off perspective across those different priorities.
Yeah. So you need first of all, you want to empower teams. So you don't want to be elevating that or escalating that. So you can make it everybody's job and say, I want to see a tax. 30% of things need to be evolving the fundamentals of our business around risk or around technical debt. You can have a quality, not quality. You can have a team that's focused very much on risks separately. But to arbitrate it, you kind of need some kind of portfolio that's where I recommend the leadership actually spend more of their time, is agreeing on, here's our pie of resources. I'm not going to prescribe how we're organized around it, but I kind of want to see a portfolio where we're spending enough time on these things that might get overlooked. So at least I can monitor whether or not we're spending cycles on it. And then obviously I want to see the candidate initiatives beneath that and know kind of how we're prioritizing those.
It's a really good point you're making in terms of, and I'm thinking through our highly regulated kind of world that we live in under the NDIS, and safety is a really big topic for us. I think at times there's been discussions about, should we have a safety team? And then we sort of say, no, it's everyone's responsibility to build safe products. But sometimes those things aren't as sexy as, a recommendations engine or a jobs board, or things that actually customers probably would get far more value from. So how do you imagine balancing that really well so that you maintain that really strong compliance, but also getting enough people excited about that safety element so it gets done while balancing value.
Right. So the analogy for me is when you create a maintenance team.
Mm.
That's the team that fixes all the bugs to make sure we have quality. You don't want that, right? Because it feels like you've got all of the crappy stuff to work on. So it actually depends on the level you can solve. You can solve it at many different levels. Which one is appropriate to you? So my first thought is safety seems like a pretty essential value proposition, like core strategic pillar for your organization. So it may be, the question I would probably ask is it a differentiator? Can it be a differentiator? If it is, then you could solve it at a team level because you've got a team that can get very excited about creating a core differentiator for the business and speaking about safety in a very different way, in that it's actually fundamentally about driving success in the business. If it's more of there's a method called the Kano method of prioritization. I won't go into too much detail in the interest of time, but if it can be a customer delighter, then it sounds like make it a team, make it its own thing, elevate safety as one of the core strategic tenets, figure out how to measure it, and empower a team and celebrate that team frequently. If it's more of what's called a basic need, in that customers expect a certain level of safety, but differentiating yourselves and investing even more in safety does not actually increase customer satisfaction. It's a potential customer dissatisfier if it's not there, but it's not a customer satisfier if you do better and better at it. Then it's better to solve it more at the values and team level. And I'll talk about what I mean by that. At the values level, I mean that it has to become a core thing that everybody thinks about. And then in terms of institutionalizing it, there needs to be metrics that kind of everyone kind of owns, and it can be a counter metric that you don't want to see safety go backwards. And then teams need to actually effectively create, if you're using sort of user stories or epics or whatever, there needs to be a set of acceptance criteria that every team needs to basically check off on before they're allowed to essentially ship something that isn't a kind of early proof of concept. That might be the exception, where you're able to control the environment, but anything that's potentially at scale or potentially has a very negative safety, needs to have that maybe acceptance criteria. So you can solve it at the top if it's a core differentiator for your business. But if it's something a little bit more, we just have to live this, then codifying that as a value, driving that across everybody, and then enforcing it somehow in acceptance criteria would be probably the approach I might take.
Very helpful.
Any other questions?
Ken, this is probably a bit more of a high level product management question, but I'm just curious to know, given that product management is sort of bringing together the worlds of the business value and the user value, what's your experience in driving the principles of access and inclusion in product management in this process?
Right. This is very good. So two examples. First of all, at Lynda, because we were a government contractor in the US, we had to meet certain criteria that were mandated. At Masterclass, it was actually a value. Access was a value. We fundamentally believed that education was a right for everybody and that we existed in part through the wonders of digital technology of being able to kind of level the playing field for people who maybe didn't have ease of access, which is actually in tension with our own business model and our premium positioning. If you think about it, we're trying to charge a lot of money for premium content, which leans into exclusivity over access. So we had to solve these problems in many different ways. The first with Linda, I don't think we did a great job, but we mandated it, and we just made sure that someone owned it. And we did more of that enforcement acceptance criteria sort of stuff, where we had to make sure that our user interfaces in particular met various standards. And we actually had someone who was very passionate about that. And that turned out to be the secret to the success, because when someone who is passionate about it is in charge and is empowered, they will move mountains to make sure that it's achieved. And so that turned out to be the main success criteria there. And she's gone on to do amazing things, by the way, because that's such an important thing for her. At masterclass, we solved it a little bit more by making sure that we balanced our business kind of like everyday business thinking with bringing back the importance of access into the conversation. And we're very deliberate in celebrating at least anecdotes. So we would bring in students who told us at least that we'd changed their lives because they now believed in things that they could do, that they couldn't have done before, that they actually never seen, never thought this was possible, particularly in some, in particular in Middle America, or they were the only kid interested in fashion design in their largely manufacturing town, all those sorts of things you just don't think about, but we would find them. And that's where you bring them in and create great empathy within the organization about the importance of these things. And so nothing more powerful than having students emotionally, sharing their experiences to really make something important in the organization and balance out sort of more hardcore business metrics. And so that turned out to be very effective. We also did things like to balance out to ensure we had diversity and inclusion in our instructors. And I'm probably sharing a few things here, so I won't share too much, but we did value diversity and inclusion in our instruction. I think that's actually pretty evident now. If you look at the early masterclass classes, there was a lot of older white men. You look at the classes that have been coming out in the last year, there's an obvious shift. One of the very first people who were an instructor in our business category was a woman entrepreneur. And so having representation was very important to us. And that actually was at odds with things like the fact that highly successful white men actually probably made more money for us. It was actually a real reality that they would tend to sell better. But we were very deliberate, no, we're not going to optimize for that. We need a diversity and inclusion component because we know that that'll eventually be much, much better as a business anyway, because we appeal to a much wider audience for a start. And then on the student side, we would do things like making sure that we gave out thousands of free accounts to schools, disadvantaged places, those sorts of things, which went beyond, it was not just marketing. We actually probably didn't even talk about that a lot, but we would just do that because we thought it was a key value and it was important to the CEO and important to us. And that always created, what's often overlooked is this great sense of purpose within our organization that is more motivating than sort of hitting some kind of financial metric. So Mel, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but they're just some examples that I've run into.
Yeah, you certainly did. Thank you for that.
Great.
So we do have 5 minutes left, so we're coming up to the hour. I was just wondering if anybody had one last question to ask Ken before we wrap up.
I have a question. Ken, if you imagine you're in an industry like ours, where we are sort of straddling both technology and service. So what is your process for determining when something should be automated through technology and when it's actually better to not have it automated and have that human touch?
Great question. Again, this is something that literally I've run into this week. So there are two key things. The first is that is a human touch an essential part of the service delivery that cannot be automated was the first question. And what I mean by cannot be automated, I mean, theoretically everything's automated, but is an important part of the experience, the human touch, the human connection, which in many enterprise businesses, there isn't really, but in many places, many companies there are. And we definitely found that at Masterclass and others, that talking to a person on customer service, for example, generated greater retention. So first of all, I asked that question, and it also helps to have metrics that you're looking at. So I haven't mentioned that qualitative metrics are very important in all of this, whether it be NPS, which is not my favorite, but at least it quantifies customer satisfaction. If it's a qualitative metric around other ways of looking at customer satisfaction, or successful reaching a goal, or successful problems addressed, or issues addressed, those sorts of metrics are pretty important. And when you value those metrics, you will make better decisions about what actually needs to be solved by a human and what can be automated, because you may automate it, which might achieve your goal of a quicker or lower cost to actually service. But if you're seeing kind of NPS or other things drop as well, that's a problem. And that's why you have to elevate those metrics to the level of other business metrics, at least as a countermetric. By definition, I mean countermetric is you just don't want to go backwards on it. The other thing is then what can you automate? And then I think there's phases in the product where scale matters, and you don't want to be, so if you imagine a graph, there is a point at which solving problems through people is better than investing in technology, because the investment in technology, for a start, not only has a cost to it, but there's a time window in which you need to invest in it. And then there's an opportunity cost of not working on a whole bunch of other things. So theoretically, there's a point at which, that's a bad, you don't want to invest in the automation, because there's better things to be doing, or it's just going to not be as cheap as adding people. But you can get caught into linearly adding people to patch up problems for too long. And the value of the technology kind of curves like this. And at some point, the technology is just far more scalable than people in solving that problem. And it's kind of, when you hit that point, that's when you really, really need to invest in automation. And ideally before that, so you kind of hit that point rather than have a runaway kind of linear people cost scaling up. And that's particularly true if your internal people are doing things that are actually easily automated and aren't essential as part of the kind of the customer satisfaction. And the interesting thing is, if you look at everyone's role, it's not about the people, it's actually about the tasks that they're doing. And there's almost always tasks in everything they're doing that you could say, we just should be automating that. So ultimately, you kind of want to be looking for those things and trying to find lots of quick wins that add up over time. I'm not sure if I confused you there, but that's kind of like a mental model to sort of approach it.
Yeah, that was really helpful. Thank you.
No worries.
Okay, so we're at the top of the hour. So thank you, everybody, for your questions and participation. And many thanks to you, Ken.
Not at all.
Enjoyable
I'm doing this
session. And really enjoyed it.
Oh, wow, music and everything. Look, really great pleasure to chat with you, and I do see many other questions that you send out, so I'd be happy to engage you on any of those. My email address is just kenjsandy kenjsandy@gmail.com, or connect it to me on LinkedIn. It's just LinkedIn in Ken Sandy, and drop me a line. I'd love to connect. I'm partly in Australia to really, I'm very interested in meeting a lot more of the industry and people, and understanding kind of all the amazing things that people are building here. And definitely when I met Matt, I was super excited about what you're doing. I think it's one of those really mission, purpose-driven, like needed solutions. I don't know if Matt didn't mention, but one of the other classes that I built at Berkeley was in social entrepreneurship. And what you're building is just amazing. And to do that, you know, in the scalable way that you're doing, I was really excited to be able to spend some time with you.
Great. Thank you, Ken. That's really good.
Thank you, Ken.
Sure, we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
all the
Bye.
best. Bye.